I want to share today some work that we're doing in the United States on a technology initiative called the Geospatial Platform, but because of this session I want to focus on sort of some of the policy drivers that are behind this and what problems we're hoping to solve with this initiative from a technology perspective as we move forward. So I'll just briefly touch on a number, so start with the history of kind of where we're at with this shared services initiative and some of the current capabilities. I'll share a couple, really briefly, some things on what we're doing soon. And then most importantly, I want to talk about the purpose. So how does this advance what the US government is trying to do in terms of bringing to fruition this vision of this somewhat nebulous thing called the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, and how do we make this more practical and more real for our users? So I'll start with touching on some of the current capabilities. One of the things that I reflect on often is that, when I started my career in the federal government, at least, that part of my career in geospatial technology, I spent time having to explain to political officials and others what I do. We do GIS. I support, the users who are doing digital mapping and working with topographic maps and other things. The need to make that case has become insignificant in terms of the time commitment that's required for people in the federal government. People come in, they use Google Maps, they use commercial geospatial technologies every day. It's more understood, what the value of these tools are and what our community does, in terms of making geospatial data and analytical capabilities more widely available. But I think as government, and perhaps to some extent nationally, we have a number of challenges that remain, with regards to our ability to really take advantage of what's going on in the commercial sector and to best use them for public good and for delivering public service. Some of those challenges, certainly not all of them, include finding the right data at the right time. One of the projects that I'm involved in from the policy side is a program called data.gov, which is the United States National Catalog of Open Data. So today, I think if you were to go to the site, there are roughly 130,000 or so data sets that are registered in data.gov, and about 90,000 of them, roughly 90 to 100,000, are geospatial. They're mapping data sets, web services, tools, and things like that. Finding the one that you're interested in is a non-trivial exercise, still today, unfortunately. When I was at EPA, actually, and I came into the geospatial leadership role in that organization, the first thing I did was I went to a national metadata clearinghouse and said, find me the toxics release inventory, one of EPA's kind of gold star, most popular data sets. And I got a 10-year-old clip of the data from the state of Arkansas. That was the first hit that I got in one of these national catalogs. It wasn't our authoritative data. It certainly wasn't the data we wanted to present to users first. So making sure that we can surface our authoritative and key national data sets. Authoritative is a very loaded term, so we call them nationally significant in some regards. Data sets and search results is a big part of what we're trying to do. Lastly, and Scott touched on this a little bit, the government tends to operate at a different pace than many other parts of the of the country do, many other parts of the economy do. We have been slow in taking advantage of the huge explosion of geospatial technology in the commercial marketplace, and that's something that we're really trying to do a better job of, is to make sure that we can leverage some of that innovation in the marketplace. From a business and policy standpoint, we had a number of different drivers to start this program, and it really came out of several years of discussion of the Federal Geographic Data Committee and a desire to do something more operational. This was a group of people and a group of agencies that spend a lot of time together, and as time went on, in all candor, we kind of got bored with PowerPoints and policies and just standards. We wanted to leverage the relationships we had and the people that were there and the shared funding that we had to do some things with regards to operational IT programs and to push our mapping agendas and our geospatial capabilities forward. As these discussions were going on, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill took place. So it gave us a very real, very practical need to have shared situational awareness across the agencies, shared capabilities for publishing geospatial data, for publishing maps and other things. So we really took advantage of some of those opportunities that were presented to us and created this program called the Geospatial Platform out of the FGDC. Today it is a partnership with data.gov. It's the geospatial side of the Obama administration's open data initiative. So we do a lot of the work that we've done to date, in fact, is building capabilities into the national data.gov catalog for mapping, for hosting and storing geospatial data, for including our metadata and other things like that. And today, some of the policy drivers that we're faced with include, the work that we're doing on open data, but also some more specific work in terms of making more climate data available to promote national community resiliency. From a timeline perspective, I won't touch on a lot because I really want to get to the end of this. And these are two of the major kind of policy drivers that we're looking at now as the Federal Geographic Data Committee in advancing this work on shared services and the work that we're doing on the Geospatial Platform. And those are the two documents referenced in bold at the bottom of the slide. So first, and perhaps most importantly, is this concept of a National Spatial Data Infrastructure Strategic Plan. There was an NSDI strategic plan that was created in the Federal Geographic Data Committee roughly a decade ago. We very recently realized this was something that was sorely overdue to be revisited in terms of not just technology, but really the role of the federal government as a member of this ecosystem of geospatial practitioners. I think when the NSDI initiative in the United States was first conceived, the federal government was the major producer of geospatial data in the United States. And now we're, a consumer. We produce some, but for the most part, we're leveraging state and local sources. We're aggregating state and local sources. We're using commercial sources and many other types of information. So really looking at our role in what the federal government can best be useful to the nation in terms of advancing our shared geospatial capabilities was a big part of what we rethought and put down in policy documentation with regards to this strategic plan. And it's hard to believe that we're now about halfway through, so this was intentionally a 3-year plan with a relatively short time horizon so we could show and demonstrate progress that was being made along the way. And the other one, the National Geospatial Data Asset Management Plan, I'll touch on a little bit more as I move in through technology. But for now, suffice it to say, it's trying to take this big idea of a national spatial data infrastructure. What's all the geodata that could potentially be useful from the public sector to companies, to other organizations, and to boil it down to what do we think is the most important? What are the critical data sets, and how is it that we can do a better job of measuring how we're doing as a country in terms of making that data available? So the Geospatial Platform program is comprised of a few different components. I'm going to talk just really briefly about what we're doing with web presentation and collaboration on the site, our search and catalog work, shared IT and data investments, the work that we're doing with shared infrastructure to make more data available, and then I'll touch on the National Geodata Assets topic that I just introduced. But suffice it to say that today the Geospatial Platform program is more or less the central instance of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure in the US. So this is what the FGDC is working on as our kind of shared technology platform. The website, I'll show a screenshot to walk through some of this, but essentially just shows what's topical, what's current, what's trending. But I think most importantly what we're doing on the website is presenting content in communities. One of the things that we learned early on as we stood up this kind of shared initiative was that a lot of our partners really wanted their corner, a place where they could collaborate or work together. They wanted to publish their maps and their data and their documents and have their threaded discussions and other things. So we've built these collaborative capabilities into the website where our partners can come in and they essentially own the content in that part of the website. They can share documents, they can publish data, they can publish their tools and applications and other things. And today those are organized around the themes of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. So we have 16 content themes, and we've gone through a process in the FGDC for identifying responsible parties for managing that content in each place. And then there are a number of communities that are being stood up over time for just interagency collaboration. This is a screenshot of what the site looks like today. It's going to change pretty drastically, so I'll show a slide of what's coming soon. But if you go there today, I don't know where the pointer is, but up in the upper right you see about 95,000 data sets. I think that's gone up a little since I took this screenshot. The box in the middle is interesting, trending data. You can see what people are actually hitting in the data.gov catalog and in our repository at any given time. I should stress, because I get this question a lot, and maybe I don't do it justice in my conversations, those 95,000 data sets, only a handful of which are actually physically resident in our infrastructure. Most of these live in your agencies, they live in organizations all over the country, and are registered as a part of this national clearinghouse of information. As time goes on, we're hosting more and more of that data as a benefit to our partners. So it's a mixed model where some of it is actually physically stored and managed in our environment, and some of it, most of it, the vast majority, is managed at the partner contributors. This is an example of one of the communities of practice that we've built into the site. In this case, for the Homeland Security Geospatial Concept of Operations Collaborative Community. They own and manage this part of the website. My team doesn't do it. We essentially gave them a shell, and we gave them the user credentials, and they can go in and decide who gets to put what content on what page. They sign terms of rules of behavior essentially with us, and we kind of monitor what they do in the site. But nonetheless, they can register what's useful from their perspective with regards to what tools, what data sets, what discussions do we want to have. We have shared calendars and other things. So really a collaboration space where these groups can work together. Search and catalog, I've touched on this a couple of times. Again, this is something where we're looking at making major changes into the fall and into the winter, and I'll touch on that in the coming soon section. But you can see today, it's actually the number is about 95,000 data sets, tools, maps, and applications. The search today is pretty simple, and that's one of the challenges that we have is you're really looking at kind of bounding box, some keywords, some other search facets to narrow down what you're looking for. But we're going to be making a lot of progress in the future in terms of really refining that search experience. One thing that we found in looking at that trending data box is very few people actually go to geoplatform.gov or data.gov and search for geospatial data. They search at Google, they search at Bing, they search in the commercial, the places where people actually look for things on the web, as opposed to always coming to our search interface and looking for things. So we're working really hard to make sure that these records are indexed well in those commercial search engines also. Shared technology. One of the things that has been a big driver of this initiative from the beginning is making sure that all of our agency partners have access to the best available commercial technology for hosting and managing their geodata, for publishing tools, and for really getting open data out into the public. As a federal, IT sector employee, I mean, one of the challenges that I see is we tell a lot of organizations, this is important. You need to publish your data, you need to make it available as web services, but we don't really give them a lot of help, in terms of doing that. It's kind of left as an exercise to the end user across a lot of government organizations. And you see people making tough choices. Am I going to spend this money on my program, or am I going to spend this money on new servers to publish data to the public? I don't have a statutory mandate or a policy mandate necessarily that's trumping other things that I have to do to make this data available. So we think that we leave a lot of data on the table, essentially. We don't necessarily publish everything that we could as open and interoperable web services. And that's a part of what the value proposition of the geospatial platform is how can we build a shared hosting environment that's a common good, a place that the FGDC can decide which data sets need a home, which data sets need to be published and operational and made available to people. Lastly, the national geodata assets. This is, I think, a really important idea, and I'm going to show some of the progress that we've made that we're going to be releasing on the website over the summer in terms of, this is essentially going to become kind of our report card on how are we doing with moving forward on this thing called the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got 100,000-ish data sets that we're trying to make available and that you can discover on our site or in data.gov. The FGDC's gone through a process of identifying which of those data sets are the most important, according to the members of the FGDC and the partners in other organizations that collaborate through the FGDC process. Today, and this is going to be a dynamic list, there are going to be calls to revisit this and to add and remove things from the list as time goes on, but there are roughly 170 data sets that were identified in that process. And from the standpoint of the policy of what the FGDC is trying to do, these are the most important assets that we're trying to make sure are always available as high-performing web services, are complete, they're current, and that we're publishing metrics about how we're doing in upholding the promises that we're making about the importance of those data sets. So really starting to measure what that means and how we're doing and how far along we are in terms of making those data sets available is going to become a critical part of our work on the geospatial platform. I've mentioned the document earlier. There is a management plan that's published. It's on the FGDC website that talks about the process for how we do that. We're making agencies accountable for performance in terms of publishing these data sets. And we really do want to start giving them back feedback. Here's how many users we see on geoplatform.gov that were using your data. Here's how many tools were built that use your data, and so on. Let me talk about what's coming soon. So we're currently in the midst of a redesign and complete redeployment of the geospatial platform in its entirety. So not just the website, but also the hosting infrastructure and other capabilities that underlie what we're doing. We're moving it all into a commercial cloud environment, which is non-trivial sometimes in the federal government sense. We're moving more and more into commercial cloud environments, but for the most part, there have been security challenges and policy and contractual challenges for many of us in getting there. But we are happy to announce that we're moving everything into the Amazon Web Services environment, which gives us virtually unscalable infrastructure, continuously scalable infrastructure to publish whatever it is that we need, and greatly increased capabilities and performance. So I'll step through some things that we're calling a preview release right now. This is the new version of the website that'll come online later this summer, and it's still just a website. But what we're trying to do is really drive people through a more personalized experience. So instead of just saying, here's what's trending, here's what other people on the site have looked at, we're keeping track of the context of what people do on the site and watching their behaviors, watching which maps they picked up. And we want to create an experience so when Kevin logs on to geoplatform.gov, we'll show him, here are the maps that you looked at last time. Here are maps that people who are in groups with you liked. Here are data sets that are in those maps. And to try and build the social experience around the things that are in the NSDI as a way to really kind of build some social aspects around use of this data, and it will help us ultimately in terms of measuring the value and how people are using some of these assets in the NSDI. So the whole website will change based on context, what you've done recently, and perhaps what's going on with other members of your community. Search is a big part of that. So one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing is taking advantage of those behaviors to make sure we're surfacing the most important or the most relevant search results to people who are looking. This is a new search interface and map viewer that we're getting ready to release on the Geospatial Platform later this summer, early in the fall. And a couple of things a note, and I know it's very small on the screen, but two important kind of takeaway messages. One is the ability to actually visualize all those things that were in the data.gov catalog. So I mentioned there were 90,000 or whatever it is services, data sets and services. Of that collection, there are roughly 12,000 either OGC or Esri equivalent web services that are registered in our catalog. So for the first time now, users can go through and visually browse what that is. So what does that mean? How do I make a map that contains some of those things? And we hope quickly go through and filter and build and share maps that contain the data that we're advertising as being a part of the NSDI. The second part of that is giving users some indication of quality. And I mentioned, and by quality in this case, I mean really service quality, service availability, service performance, and uptime. I mentioned that of all of those data sets, virtually all of them are made available by our partner organizations. We don't control that centrally, so we don't have central control over how well they perform or how fast they are. So you can see the little stoplight indicators. There's red and green. There's also a yellow indicator that gives the user a heads up. Some of these services are really good. They're always available. Some of these services are not so good because this has been a frustrating experience for people looking at national geospatial data collections. Sometimes you click on something and nothing happens, and there's no obvious reason as to why. More importantly, from a policy perspective, we really want to be giving this data, these statistics back to our partners as a way to kind of raise the bar in terms of the quality of what people are doing with making their data sets available. So over time, we'll be publishing more and more metrics and making these available to our agency partners as a way to really promote the importance of making high quality services available. This is just a screenshot of the capability to go in and share a map. You'll be able to create a map. Any user can come in, create a map, embed it on another website, share it with others, and so on. So we're pretty excited about some of these capabilities that are coming online. And lastly, I mentioned the service quality indicator. So this is the first version of the dashboard for the National Geodata assets that we're going to come online and make available to our users. And this is really kind of one visual way of going in and seeing, as I mentioned, how we're doing in terms of advancing the NSDI. So in this particular case with this dashboard, there's a survey instrument that all of our agency partners are in the process of responding to, and we're publishing metrics about how they're doing in terms of the currency of their data, whether the metadata are complete and current, whether they're, what the last time the data set was updated, what their archiving plans are for. So there are a whole series of questions that they're responding to. And the hope is that shining some sunlight on this will raise, the bar again and really provide, a more complete, more current, more robust set of data from the platform, as we'll use these scorecards to kind of manage, how we're doing and where attention needs to be paid with regards to advancing the NSDI. So how does this advance the NSDI? That last chart that I showed organizes those metrics or the early performance indicators by the data life cycle. So how is it that we're making data available in inventories? How are we obtaining and collecting data? How are we providing access to data, maintaining those data sets, and how do people actually use them? So we think that we can do things to, with this technology program that advance all of those different aspects. So we've got, with regards to inventory, a metadata catalog that's been published in partnership with data.gov, as I mentioned. I didn't talk about this a lot, but one of the other things that we're working on is this concept of a marketplace in the geospatial platform. So how is it that, and somebody has referred to it as a Craigslist or an eBay for geodata. I don't think it'll ever be that cool, or it certainly won't be that widely used, but the basic concept of how do you build a place where people can come in and make deals, including potentially private sector partners. So we're going to have planes in this part of the country on this date. We can offer public sector agencies X discount if they're willing to fly, have their imagery acquired within a couple-week window of that. Or whatever those kinds of things are. But how do we build a marketplace for people to come together and collaborate around shared data needs and shared acquisition in the public sector? Lastly, we're supporting certainly access. The web services presentation of all of our data is facilitated in part by the shared infrastructure on the platform. And then maintain, I mentioned the quality of service indicators. What is it that we're trying to do to show progress in the NSDI through those dashboards and other tools that we'll be releasing? And then lastly, use. I think one of the things that perhaps we haven't done a great job on as the federal agencies is documenting the so what. So we put all these data sets out there, and I think we have some good anecdotes about how people are using those data sets in different cases. I wouldn't say we have great data across the board on how people are using our data sets and the tools that they're building, how many times those services are accessed, and so on. We really think that through instrumenting everything, all the services that are part of the platform, all the tools that we're building centrally across the NSDI, that there's a big opportunity to provide those metrics back to our partners and show them how their data services are being used and show them how their tools are being leveraged by others.